Well, welcome to At the Table with the AACC, or the Asian American Christian Collaborative. At the Table is a series of roundtable discussions where Asian American Christian pastors and leaders are able to draw from their experiences, their education, and expertise to discuss questions and issues that impact the Asian American Christian community and church. Today, we're at the historic Chinese Community Church of Washington, D.C., located in the heart of Chinatown. The church was actually founded in 1935 and is the only Chinese church in the D.C. proper area. Today, we're actually going to be talking about next generation engagement, and I have with us some really amazing church leaders. I'm going to ask that they would introduce themselves and also where they're engaging most with the next generation. So if we could start here with Pastor Brian.
My name is Brian Lee. I'm the senior pastor of English congregation at New Covenant Fellowship Church in Germantown, Maryland. I engage with my daughter, 14-year-old daughter, and also 12-year-old son. And also I've been a youth pastor for many years too. So yeah, the next generation is very dear to my heart. Yeah.
I'm Dorothy Lau, and I'm the youth director at the Chinese Bible Church of Maryland in Rockville, Maryland. And I engage with the next generation through working directly with students in middle and high school, so ages 11 to 18, with some sprinkles of college students. And I have the privilege and honor just to work with so much puberty and to have the joy too to see the transformation that occurs in all areas and aspects of life.
Great. My name is Steve Park. I'm the executive director of Little Lights Urban Ministries in Washington, D.C. And so I have a 19-year-old daughter who's starting her sophomore year in college, and my son who's starting senior in high school. So I have two Gen Zs that I grew up with, and then I also have interns. We primarily work with African American students, but we have Asian American interns that come through our organization. So I've gotten to know some of the young people, young Asian Americans that have come through Little Lights.
Very cool. And my name is Kevin Yee. I am the college young adults pastor at Church Every Day in Northridge, California. And previous to that, I was a youth pastor working with middle and high school students for the last 18 years. I also have three kids, 7, 10, and 12. And so I've got a bunch of Gen Alpha and Gen Z running around in my house as well. So this topic is obviously, I think, near and dear to all of us. One of the things that I've learned from Ray Chang of the AACC and the 10 by 10 collaboration is that over the last couple of years, especially the last decade, there's been some surveys done, and it's been discovered that the church is losing about 1 million young people per year. And so it feels like it should be more of a crisis. I do think that, churches focused on engaging with the next generation have been talking about this. But I think I want to start by talking about, this is clearly something that's been happening in the American church for a long time. Do you feel that sense of urgency in the Asian American church? I think I want to start there. Do you get a sense that what's going on in the Asian American church with the next generation is dire?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, in our church context, obviously, whether it's silent exodus, we use those terms where people stop going to church after high school. I mean, the stats are out there, and it's pretty real because, like our youth group students, when they go to school, college, they stop coming for various reasons. So to answer your question, I think it's a definite yes. It's something we need to talk about. I don't have a solution, but it's something that we really need to look into and discuss and come up with a better way to approach it. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like both statistically and I guess anecdotally, this is a problem just across the country, maybe even across the world. I'm not totally sure, but. And I also want to just think about it as rather than saying, how do we keep more people in church? I feel like in some ways, that's not the right question. Mm-hmm. That the goal is to keep people in church. Maybe to do what? Are we just perpetuating church attendance or the survival of church institutions? And so I think more important than how many kids are we keeping in the church is what does success look like in terms of like what we want out of our young people to commit to. And I think we need in some ways, a clearer vision and a better vision than let's keep more people coming to church and find ways to keep moving. I think it's how do we get youth to really be committed to Christ to then help make a difference in the world. And I think we do have to train and disciple young people to be really missional, and not just missional in like bringing more people to church, right, or converting people to Christianity, but missional is like really like living out the commandments and teachings of Jesus, like the Beatitudes, and to be loving our neighbors as ourselves, to be committed to righteousness and serving others. And so in some ways for me, I think it's more important than numerically how many kids we keep in church or young people, but how do we disciple young people to be really holistically transformational disciples that really bring light into the world.
Yeah, I think the way that we minister to and minister among young people is to, in earlier conversations, we use the word empowerment, to empower them to be conduits for the kingdom. And it's not just a matter of making invitations, but letting that spark a curiosity as to why living for Christ and his kingdom is so much better than living for our own little kingdoms or living for worldly standards. So it's a challenge that is an everyday agreement with the Lord. It's like, yes, I want to follow you more than yesterday, because I need you today just as much as I did yesterday, and I will need you tomorrow as much as I needed you today.
Yeah, I resonate with what you guys are all saying. I resonate a lot, Steve, with what you were saying about this idea of like, what's the goal? Yeah. And I think the students themselves are asking that question of why should I be here, yeah, right? Like, and so if we can't talk clearly about why it's important for the students to be engaged in the church community, or if we haven't shown them all the time that they've been at church, then I think there definitely needs to be self-inspection as church leaders to really consider all that. And so that leads me to another question about belonging. So what does it mean for Asian American students to belong in the church community? I mean, my church is a Korean immigrant church, and sometimes I get a sense that belonging is just simply obeying your parents and being around and near your parents. And then that's at odds sometimes with the idea that oftentimes parents want their kids to go to the big colleges, and the Ivy League schools that are like across the country, And so I think there's definitely that tension there. But a lot of times students, that's the way they feel. They feel like, well, you just want me here because you just want me here. But what's really compelling about what it means to be a part of a church? So how would you answer that from the perspective of a Gen Z student that's really asking, like, well, why should I stick around? What's the purpose? What's the reason that I should be around? How would you guys talk to the potential inner dialogue of a Gen Z student that's really thinking about what it means to stick around at church?
I think for me, one of the things that I've been really thinking about is how do I help my kids, I mean, they're part of the youth group, to know that they are part of the church. Because sometimes youth group kind of becomes their own church. And sometimes when they come out of youth group, they get integrated into the bigger church, and they just feel very foreign because this is not the church they're used to. So they go out and they seek another replicate of another youth group. But they can't find it anywhere because they're older now. Right. So I think that's the struggle they go, and I've seen that again and again and again. So one of the things that we've been kind of talking about within our church is, okay, our youth group name is Timothy, but we need to really not destroy their identity, but they need to know that they're part of this NCFC church as a whole, so that they know that they're not just attending adult service, they're not attending KCEC service, but this is their church. So part of how we kind of present that is, when we have these services, this is your service as much as it's my service. So you can serve as an usher. You don't have to be a deacon to serve as an usher. I mean, there are obviously the maturity stuff that we need to consider, but then we have to go through that, like, why? Like, do we really need that? Like, how do we empower them, even though these are small things that they can do, but those things can give them sense of ownership. Handing out bulletins, maybe participating in the communion. Like, is it so wrong that only deacons or pastors, like, only these people can serve the place? So we started asking all these questions. I think, I know we're going into more things, but I feel like that's kind of how I've been processing, just kind of from my kids' point of view. Yeah.
Okay. A few words that have come to my mind are like, so going back to the question is how do we help young people have a sense of belonging, right? So some words in my mind have been, what are young people looking for? What is it that they desire? Is it a sense of affirmation? Is it to be purposeful and useful? Do they simply want friends because they're lonely? Is there a place that they feel safe? Because in many immigrant homes, young people may not feel as inclined to be vulnerable because that is not the kind of relationship they may have with their parents. It's authoritarian. It's a very clear separation between who's in charge and who's taking orders. So looking at church, I totally agree with Pastor Brian that it should be a place where the students, young people, approach it as, this is your church, this is your family, this is for you. But I think coming from a Chinese context, the question is, what purpose does this serve? A student may ask, why am I here? What am I supposed to do? And this is a season of their lives, well, a very long season of their lives where they are being served. And then when they reach an age where they are able to serve, that mostly comes from being at least spiritually mature to some degree. And to belong, I think, is to take ownership and to be poured into as much as you can pour into that same community. Meaning you can receive as much as you can give, but out of the overflow of having already received from Christ. So it really depends on the individual, but that sense of belonging, I think, comes from like a sense of purpose and identity with Christ, with his kingdom, and with the community at large. But not every young person has gone through that journey or even having been broken. They just see the church as the place that they've always gone and been to and been served by. And when it no longer serves a purpose, they go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think, for my kids, and I think a lot of Gen Zers, they are very influenced by social media, and like they've learned a lot also on social media, and they have a lot of questions, and I think there's a lot of skepticism also toward church institutions, and I think not the least of which is like what's happened politically that has involved the church, and there's skepticism and confusion, and there's a lot of questions, and I think it's important for churches when dealing with young people is to allow them to have questions and not judge, and create a space to be skeptical, and sometimes be angry at what other Christians are doing or saying in the public sphere, and because some of it's absolutely legitimate, and so I think it's important to be non-judgmental. And I know like one issue that impacts Gen Zers a lot, and they think about it a lot, is like climate change, right? It's something they think about, they've learned about, they see it as a crisis, and that's just one example of many. And instead of saying, oh, that's not important, or just learning the Bible is what's really important, is being able to affirm, that is a problem, that is something that as Christians, we should care about. Like, we should care about stewarding the environment. We should, and to encourage activism and trying to produce positive change in the world. And it may not be something a lot of pastors are theologically trained to do. Like, how do you affirm activism? How do you affirm students, young people who have a passion to try to make the world a better place by being socially active? And so I think that's something that I think pastors and leaders need to learn. is even theologically how the Bible aligns with many of those things about concern for the environment, about concerns for racial justice and things like that. And so that requires humility on the part of leaders, and allowing a safety to have these questions, but also for students to be vulnerable, to be honest, without judgment. And I think that's going to be critically important to serving Gen Z.
My daughter's 14, and sometimes we talk about like, oh, I need to be at church by 9:40, and I'm like, why so early? Then she tells me I need to go help our elementary school worship leaders. So even things like that, I think having like an opportunity for her to go, like teach them some like, motions and things like that, where these kids are a little too young, so like she goes there before she goes into her own Bible study. Like she feels like, okay, I'm important. Like I need to go early to prepare these people. I feel like those opportunities, sometimes we don't give kids enough opportunity to really thrive in what they already have. And they're constantly just in the classroom, just learning and learning and learning. But we're actually entering a season where we're questioning, like, do they need to have an hour of Bible study every Sunday? I mean, it sounds almost like heretic to like ask questions like that as Asian Americans. But then like, is it okay for them to miss Bible study 1 week and then maybe use that opportunity to go serve in the elementary school ministry? So we're questioning things like that actually right now. Yeah.
I think the idea of like where students can really feel like they belong in a church has a lot to do with how welcomed and how they're received in a lot of various spaces. And I think the sort of cultural dynamics of Asian American churches, I think, makes it always feel like, because even for me, I'm in my 40s, and I walk into certain spaces. I'm an adult. Oh, and thank you, by the way, I do. I appreciate that. I need that affirmation, yeah. But I walk into certain spaces and I don't feel like an adult. I feel like a child, So I totally understand when Gen Z's like, I just don't know like when I fully feel like I'm a part of the church. So I totally understand that. Yet at the same time, now that I have my own kids, I also resonate with the idea of like, but please, my own kids, like just stay at the church. Like when you graduate and move on, I just want us all to be together. Because when I was, going to college, like I had thoughts about like, should I leave the church? Should I go, to another church? Or, the dream at the time when I was, after I graduated high school was to the white church, like the white mega church. Like that's where I want to be,
Yeah, that's varsity.
That's right.
It's varsity.
This is junior varsity, that's varsity. And so I understand that tension and I feel that tension. And I'm just wondering how you guys have maybe either counseled some families or students through that, how you guys have dealt with that in your personal experiences. I'm just curious about that.
I can speak from my own experience as having grown up in one of the largest and oldest churches in the Chicagoland region, is that it's always like the warm fuzzy feeling of a family that goes to church together, stays together, but that doesn't take into account that some family members will go through different tracks or paths at some point in life. I went to school in Central Illinois for 4 years, and that was at a predominantly white church, but I think because in a way I had been absent from an ethnic specific context for so long, I was rejoicing in returning to the church at which I was raised. And so my parents, they were glad and grateful that I had a very deep desire to return to my church, when in fact actually within 10 years the church split practically 3 times. So it's unfortunate, but at the same time, like I'm unfazed by church splits because I understand the nuances and the difficulties that come from wanting unity, but sometimes unity is an ideal rather than being a healthy practice. So wanting to keep your kids at your church, like totally get it. But I think that there's a lot of value as well in letting our children explore. And in that age of exploration, I think that it helps them to understand and identify what is it that they really believe and whom do they really trust, and do they feel a sense of home when they come back. I think that for me, the benefit of having gone to school, a few hours away from Chicago, it gave me the chance to really sift through what I believed and the type of community I wanted to be committed to. For some of our students here, I think that, or churches rather, retention is such a high priority, but at what cost? And I think in the effort to keep our young people, we're stifling them. And they stay, but not necessarily out of their own volition, but rather out of obligation. And when they reach an age that they are maybe complacent or they feel like they're not being challenged anymore, they have a little bit of bitterness in them. It's like, you didn't let me branch out, or I felt like I didn't get the blessing to go explore. And now, they may go to a different church, or sometimes the reality is they may not continue in their commitment to any church body. So I think giving them the blessing to explore and to venture out, but helping to inculcate a firm knowledge of and love for God. I think that's really the bare essential.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, I don't work in a church, and I'm not even serving as a leader in the church that I attend, because I'm doing ministry 6 days a week. Sundays is sort of like my Sabbath. Right, yeah, so that's when I get served. But it also makes it harder to be really involved in one particular church. But I also believe, I think young people gain a large part of their understanding of like the faith in the home. Yeah. And I don't think it's, for me, it's really less about like what parents say they believe. It's really how parents' faith is real in the home, and the values that they actually live their lives by on a day-to-day basis, and how their faith informs their day-to-day lifestyles and actions, and how they treat people different than themselves, treat non-Christians, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's what really puts the impression on young people about what Christianity is. It's how it's actually lived out in the home, how parents manage their own emotions and feelings and negative feelings and all those things. I think kids get an unconscious understanding of like what does faith really mean on a day-to-day basis. So I think if we put too much emphasis on Sunday mornings and not enough emphasis on like how we're actually behaving at home and how we handle our emotions, how we trust God on a day-to-day level, I think that's where kids really understand faith. And there's a danger in some ways of putting all of our faith basket into a church. Because when things go wrong in the church, whether the senior pastor falls or whether the denomination goes through a scandal, if you've associated God almost entirely with church, then your whole sense of faith can get shattered because you've trusted the institution almost as God, right? And so I think there's a danger in sort of putting all your eggs in one basket when it comes to like helping kids understand what faith really is about. So I think there's a balance there of wanting kids to go to church, but also realizing that's not where you're going to find all of God, is by going to church. And I think we don't want to limit our understanding of God to seeking God only in the church setting.
It's like the danger of equating faith with being communal, but there's also private worship. So if students, or if young people, if believers are only keeping to Jesus can have my Sunday morning, but everything else is for me. I think I've seen in college how while there are certain churches or ministries that can be immensely powerful, it's built around a very strong communal sense. And when those young people are no longer in the college setting, then their faith has been shattered, or it has become an association more than a personal conviction that they want to follow the Lord. It's an unfortunate outcome, but it's one where it just highlights again the reality of how much one must pursue God to know God, not just pursue God out of convenience and the community that in which they are surrounded.
I think the other thing I think about is the fact that if we know that students are inevitably going to be leaving, then I think one of the things that we can do is make sure that we're a community of grace that is ready and welcome to receive them when they come back. Yes. So that's been an interesting dynamic for me because I was a youth pastor for so long. And, you know, the city that we're in, you know, there's not that many big colleges near us. The students generally, especially the ones that are pushed academically, they tend to go pretty far. Mm-hmm. And so we just don't have a large, like, college community nearby us. But then as soon as, you know, the summers hit or they graduate, the idea is they all come back. And what's really strange is sometimes I feel like Asian American churches have this thing of like, well, you left us, you betrayed us. And so it's very hard for them to come back and integrate. But so one of the things that I've tried to do as a college young adults pastor is, like, I'm receiving the students back, and you're not back in the same exact environment that you left, but I want to show them that it's different, and there's a possibility for you to continue to make this your home, even though you've been gone for some time. And I think that idea of like creating that environment of grace is so important for the next generation because, again, they're looking for a groundedness and a rootedness, especially after college, because, you know, they just had this wonderful life experience that will never be repeated ever again in their life.
Yeah,
it's a very
retreat. Yes.
It's a very specific time of your life. And the idea is I think they're looking for that sort of support. Yeah. And I find that honestly, initially, it's very difficult being a college young adults pastor because I was just under the impression that these guys are ready, they're formed, they've had their identity figured out, and we're gonna do some like crazy ministry together. But it's actually, no, I'm receiving people who are grieving their college experience. They're grieving the fact that they're no longer like kids and they have to start their adulting journey. And I was like, oh, this is totally a different thing.
It's like, wait, pay off loans? Yeah. What?
Or just how, you know, just they thought that their life after college would be a certain way and they get a full-time job, and that's good. But guess what? You don't have a lot of free time anymore. They're like, my day is just I work and then I come home and I'm tired. Yeah. Then I wake up the next day and I go to work again. I'm like, welcome to adulthood. So it's like, building that sort of gracious community, supportive community, I feel like is really, really important. But I think that there's a lot of challenges in the context that we're in, which is for us as an immigrant church, right? Mm-hmm. Because again, I think the expectations on the first generation side is like, well, how come they're not like involved? They used to be so involved in youth ministry. Where are they now? You know, and I feel like I have to defend the students, and I have to do a lot of that explaining. Yeah. So I'm just curious to the idea of like, okay, there's a generation gap that needs to be filled in there with regards to how we talk about the next generation. And I was just wondering how you guys have navigated those realities.
I think for us, I think a couple things, giving them like a space and an opportunity to even like speak their mind, now not only among their peers, but even with church leaders. So I remember there were a couple instances where a couple of our elders invited our young adult students to their home, and things like that. It's not at church, it's more home, feed them, because you know, food is always good, especially in like Asian context, right? You feed them good Korean food or good food, and then you give them a chance to like, hey, what do you think about the church? Like, what do you want to see? And they will say things like, you know, we don't see any women leaders. I mean, it's pretty common in Asian context, right?
There are other things.
That's another topic to talk about. But things like that, you know, that's when the elders will actually directly hear from young adult students or their leaders. Whereas on Sunday, kind of like going back to your point, whether you're 40, 30, working for 10 years, you're still a child when you come to church to a lot of people's eyes. So I think, but then when they start to speak, you all of a sudden realize, wow, these people can actually share their thoughts, articulate their thoughts. So I think that's one of the ways that we were able to kind of foster that environment.
Can I ask you, that's within English speaking, or do you have the Korean speaking adults that are also engaging on that level?
Unfortunately not. Yeah. So our church is like Korean congregation and the English congregation. Thankfully, our English congregation adults are older. You know, so we have elders and deacons and people who are older. So like they can kind of function as like parents they never had. So it's very healing in a lot of ways. Like, you know, whereas like they couldn't talk to their parents because of language barrier and whatnot. But then here are English speaking adults who are actually like, who can actually share
Culturally
same,
more similar,
same values and things like that. So that's been very beneficial to our young people.
Yeah, that's something we've tried to do at our church too. So much so that we do have a few non-Koreans, and they even feel that sort of paternal love from those elders and those deacons who have kind of adopted those young adults and college students as their own, even though they're not Korean. You know, we always say that they're honorary Koreans because they've been adopted into our families. But like in some very real sense, like we mourned those students when they've left. You know, they really have felt like, and a huge part of the reason why they felt like family wasn't because just the pastors or their like teachers loved them, but it really was like elders and deacons in the church that held those titles that I think were really good examples of that. And we've tried to bridge the language gap there, but it's hard. It's really, really hard. I don't know if you've seen more success in some of your churches.
Well, I mean, whenever communication is a challenge, it's just symptomatic of other things as well. But I would say one way to really minister to those young people who are kind of in a liminal state, like in between and trying to figure out how to be an adult in their parents' church, right? It's two things I've seen is just how to connect and how to care. I think connection is so key because we are living in a very mobile and connected world, but yet people are egregiously struggling with loneliness and a lack of community, right? There's so many avenues that they could go into, but what they crave is like the personal connection. And oftentimes young people are not as inclined to reach out. They're waiting for someone to initiate towards them. So I think the power of connection, that personal connection, is actually very effective. And for it to come from someone older who is not their parents or someone who's like a close friend of their parents, like an older brother or sister, that leaves a lasting impression and impact to me. Like, I see you, I want to care for you, I want to know how you're doing, how you're feeling, and how I can pray for you. If when you're back in town, let's get a meal together, right? It's just those gestures that help to affirm someone that they are known, they are loved, that they are seen, and that they matter. Sometimes I think in larger churches, it's very hard for that to take place because everyone's busy. There are so many ministries that are happening, sometimes too many ministries, but they're serving their own purposes, and yet why is it that there are so many young people who still feel like they have no attachment to what they call their home church? So our ability to connect with, to care for our brothers and sisters is monumental, and I think in Chinese churches we're just very task-oriented. I don't know if this could be said of Korean churches as well, or other ethnic contexts, but it's like we're so focused on the tasks that we forget the fact that ministry is about people. I've also heard it say that like ministry is so hard because of the people, but without people there is no ministry, right? So, you know, to care is a powerful thing. To care also means that you might get heartbroken or you might get disappointed, but even then, if it's for the Lord, right? I don't think any pain or time is wasted. It may feel that way, but you know what comes out of the word comes out of the mouth of the Lord, like those words don't return empty. So I think it can be still very challenging to believe that we can be as effective, even if we don't see the return on investment as soon as we had hoped, but hoping that whatever intersections we may have had with others, like that can bear fruit in its own time.
If I could, sorry.
No, go ahead.
If I could add, one of the things that I've been kind of thinking and I've been telling, because I have my own kids in the youth group, I told other youth group students like, hey, I'm not your dad. I'm not even gonna try to be your dad. But because I have kids in your group, I want to be like your dad. I'm gonna try my best to be like your uncle. And And I really mean it, like, and I have to follow up on that, but I feel like we need to kind of foster that culture in the church where in the past I used to try to do like family worship where I bring their parents to come sit with them. It just didn't work, because of language and whatnot, and service became longer and it wasn't benefiting the kids. The parents are just sitting there because they see the value in it, but then like why? So we got to a point where like, hey, like instead of trying to bring their parents in, maybe we can be their parents. Kind of like not a fake parent, but like we can truly be, like Paul to Timothy, like I can truly see you like a son and daughter. So that's been something that we've been really like at least the leadership level, hey, let's make sure that this is a culture we're cultivating so that kids will know that we truly care. We sit next to them, that they're not just annoying kids who just talk throughout the service, but we generally remind them, hey, we're having a service. We sit next to them, not just to like scold them or like take their stuff away from them, but like really, hey, we want to worship with you. And I think that's been something that I really want to cultivate, but in an Asian American culture, it's so foreign. Because people just want to drop off their kids. Okay, you go to youth group. Right. After service, we meet in the lobby. We'll grab some donut. We go home. But that's been one of the most challenging things that I've been kind of navigating as a 1.5 generation. It's like, okay, I see that having like age-appropriate ministry is good, but then where can we find this intergenerational context where we foster like a natural relationship? And we don't just force, okay, family dinner time, sit here, but like how can we have a natural place where like,
more organic.
Yeah, more organic. Oh, okay, yeah, we have worship together. Okay, you sit there, I sit there, not just youth group over there, children over there, young adult here, because that's very common in like Korean culture at least. Yeah, and it's really hard for first generation pastors to even like think that way because what? No youth group service separately? Like, no way. So I just wanted to kind of throw it out there.
Yeah, and I think, I think we have to respect young people. I think we have to respect their perspective and their values and what motivates them. And I mean, for me personally, I feel like one of my callings is to help younger Christians like understand and be able to critique the church in many ways and critique the status quo. Because I personally don't feel like the status quo is working. Like, we just keep doing things the way we're doing things and hope people stay. And hope young people stay. I think we really have to listen to young people who are critiquing. And instead of getting defensive, like, oh, why are you criticizing? Yeah. You're just a young kid, you're just influenced by this or that. Yeah. I think really respecting and saying, is there something I need to change? I think older people have to really, instead of just like, how do we hold on to them? Yeah. Is there something that really needs to change in myself, in our church, in our institutions? Is there something that really we need to even repent of? Because I don't think the answer is just always working harder. Doing more programs.
What are you doing? What are you talking about? That is the answer.
That is the answer. It's like more programs. Finding the silver bullet program.
Another
right?
committee.
Right, another committee, right? Another thinking group or whatever. Is there something that actually needs to be repented of? That part of the fruit of lack of repentance is the loss of young people. Is there something we're not humbling ourselves and really hearing what their critiques are? And so I think in some ways that's a big question that older Christians, especially evangelicals, need to really wrestle with, rather than just trying to come up with just the techniques to hold on, or even just letting them go. Yeah. Is there something that's driving young people, especially conscientious young people who have compassion, who think deeply about things? Yeah. Is there something wrong that we're perpetuating that is driving, in some cases, the best potential disciples away because they're thoughtful, they think deeply, they can be motivated to act.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another bigger question we have to think about as older Christians.
That's so good. One of the things I think about when hearing you speak, Steve, is the idea that I think a lot of young people are actually looking for healing. And I think they're looking to be healed from, I think, the trauma of being a part of an Asian American church, the trauma of being part of an Asian American family, especially if you're second or third gen. I think that the traumas of the first gen pass itself down to the second and third gen in ways that are not completely, but for the most part, they're unaware of. They're unaware that they're parenting from a certain perspective, they're parenting from trauma, parenting from fear, parenting from hurt. That gets passed on to the next generation. The next generation doesn't really understand how to deal with these things. They just want to escape, only to realize that they do have to deal with this stuff in the real world. And so they're willing to come back. I think a lot of them are willing to come back. And I think we need to empower them to help the church heal. But we have to train them, we have to talk about this, we have to provide spaces where these kind of conversations can take place. And I think that's hard. I think it's difficult because what I found is there's a generational gap in terms of wanting to talk about these things. I've found that a lot of the second generation, so there have been some students in my youth ministry and even in college ministry that have such a rough relationship with their parents. And I know that it's coming from a place where your dad or your mom also has this generational trauma, and they haven't dealt with it. It's just being passed off to you, and you're just being abused and beat up for this. And I've had to be in spaces where I'm trying to explain that to the students, but you could just tell, like, unless there's repentance and unless there's the bridging of the gap in terms of healing that trauma, it's like we're gonna have such a hard time moving forward. So there needs to be, I think, an understanding of that. But getting everybody to the table to have those conversations, I mean, that's difficult. And I wish that there was more tools out there to help us to do that. That is something I wish we had, yeah.
I would also say that as a culture, there's a tendency just to give instruction because it's like I'm older or I've lived longer, so I have more experience, so let me just tell you what to do. Or if you bring a problem to me, then I'll tell you my answer. But sometimes young people are not looking for an answer. Sometimes they just want to be heard. So what I want to differentiate, however, is that to hear is not the same as to listen. Because I think to hear is just to receive it, but to listen is to actually interact with what you are hearing. And to actively listen is to ask the questions in response. What do you mean by that? Can you tell me more? How does that make you feel? In what way has this affected you? How have you grown from it? Versus, I present a problem to an older leader and they just tell me what to do. Like, why am I feeling angry right now with being told what to do? Maybe that's a pride issue. On the other hand, it's like, maybe I should have been clear from the start. I'm not coming to you for you to just give me an answer or some type of solution. And a lot of times older folks are like, well, what do you want me to do about it? I'm like,
you want me to just listen?
That
feels like a waste of time.
I know, right? It's like, I just wanted to tell you because I'm frustrated or because this hurt me. And I want to know how to wrestle with it or like in what ways, like, have you experienced this too? And it's like trying to share that wisdom. But I think wisdom is conflated with instructions. It's like, I want your understanding, not necessarily a how-to like WikiHow and approaching a situation. So it's like approaching those intergeneral relationships, such as like, are you looking to vent? Are you looking for empathy or sympathy? Or you're actually looking for instruction? Or you just want them to listen, So like the art of care and communication, like we're just not good at that as a culture. We just get frustrated that we can't fix a situation that is very multi-layered, because when we think about parenting and the trauma that comes in, generational brokenness, I was like, wow, this has been happening for thousands of years because it's passed from one generation to another, right? But just thinking earlier what was mentioned, like how to bridge the gap still a little more. It's being very purposeful, I believe, in how we interact and capitalizing on the time that we do have together. Something that I've seen in a previous context is where the Senior Citizen Fellowship, they're like 50 plus in terms of age, they organized a dumpling gathering, like dumpling making gathering with the high school ministry. And I mean, well, yeah, because kids love to eat. They have a black hole of a stomach, but even more so that the older folks were like their parents or grandparents' age, trying to care for these young people who have no real relationships with the older members in the church. But that was a starting point. It was a starting point. And I think that just being deliberate, being purposeful, being intentional with those interactions and taking time and making the use of it is just at least the first step towards bringing greater unity between the generations, whether it's first gen, second gen, or even just within an English congregational context. How often do you see the young people mingling with the older folks?
I think one of the ways that I think it's been helping is sometimes like having those open forum with the topic is good, but just having like fun time together, you know, like, cause you know, a lot of Asian families, the only time you have serious talk is like when you're in trouble.
Yeah.
You know, like,
They say your full Chinese name
It's
or
like,
Korean name.
no, it's like, let's have a talk. You're like, okay, I'm in
Uh-oh.
trouble. Or they want to say something or like correct you. So I think just even that, just shifting that mindset, like when we come together, we're gonna have fun. So like, missions is one of the ways that really works out. You know, I've gone on missions teams where it was multi-generational. Like some older people,
That's
younger.
the fun trip.
Yeah, it's fun because you know, like they need to know that hey, doing the work of God is because I think the way the first generation saw the ministry was like it's hard work, sacrifice. You just gotta give up everything, which is true in a lot of aspects. But at the same time, there's so much joy in that. But then a lot of times the young people when they see that, they don't see the joy because when they come home, they get upset or angry, like. They take the frustration out on their kids. So when we went to missions, like me as a middle generation, I try to bridge the gap and tell them, hey, ministry is fun. Yeah. Ministry is supposed to bring joy, not only like digging the ground and sweating. Like it doesn't have to be like you go into a car without AC, just suffer for the sake of suffering. But when we do it together, it's just more fun. So when they start to see that dynamic of like, oh, it could actually be fun and we can actually have a same purpose, same goal together, that's been really helping in those contexts for our church.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, we do have to, as much as I want to continue this conversation, we do have to wrap up. Would love to just finish with any closing thoughts you have. If you were talking to somebody who's really thinking about what are some things that our church can do better, to encourage, retain, or even thinking about sending out, what would you want to say to a leader who's really thinking through that?
Empathy is important. There's a clear disparity of what generations have gone through. First gen, when they immigrated to this country, they were in survival mode. They had to worry about their basic needs, and they didn't have time nor the capacity to think about their emotions. Mm-hmm. Second and third gen, that's all they think about is their identity and their purpose. And their older counterparts may say, you're weak, or why are you thinking about these things? You need to make money and be stable. And I think that is speaking from their own experience and context, right? The first generation was in survival mode. Second and third, preceding generations have their basic needs met so they can actually begin to start thriving or to strive towards that. But the empathy is necessary in that younger generations really need to feel for their older counterparts. And the older generations, they are robust, they are tough, they are enduring, but sometimes lacking the compassion to try to understand those who are younger. Rather than condescend to say, why can't you do this? I did it. It's like, tell me more, and how can I come alongside you? So I think empathy is necessary on all interchanges between generations and persons. I know that in our spaces, we're not good at asking questions because, as the Japanese proverb says, right, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. Asking questions is almost like, are you dumb? Do you not understand? But it's more like, I'm asking questions because I want to understand more. So I think having empathy and feeling for the other, like to really walk through and to hold those emotions as close to you as it is for the other person, that will speak volumes as to not only loving God and loving others, but we love others even better because we have a better understanding of what they're going through.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I guess for me, it's just emphasizing like the value of humility.
Yes.
That I think that's what maturity should lead to. You know, maturity is not just being more competent or more knowledgeable about the Bible or better at giving a message. You know, maturity should lead to humility, and a humble person really does know how to be empathetic and listen, hear criticism well. You know, because the younger generation is going to criticize. And if we can't handle criticism, you're probably going to lose them. And so I think having the maturity, I think maturing enough that you can handle disagreement and their challenges and their criticism, I think is going to be essential to building a healthier, stronger church for the future, because we want our young people to build a better church than what we currently exist. Like we shouldn't be so prideful that we think what we've created is the standard, is the ultimate. So I think having the humility to listen to the young people and their criticisms as well as their ideas.
Like to bite your tongue until it bleeds, or just to not say anything, but to receive it with a heart that really wants to see Christ at work. Yeah.
I think for me, that you don't have to have all the answers. I think I find that sometimes I tell like kids, I don't know, and that seems to be a common thing for me, because I think even for our kids, they expect me to know everything, and I told them like, no, that's a false expectation. So I think they need to know that just because I'm an adult, like I have all the answers. So I think both ways, I need to not try so hard to solve all their issues, because sometimes that can I can put myself in a trap of trying to solve all their issues. Maybe God is working them through these problems so that they need to go through this season of life for them to come out mature in the ways that God intended them to go through. But me as an impatient father, like I just want to rescue them out, right? So I think that problem-solving mentality as an Asian, like I just want the solution, like no equation. Yeah. So I think that I need to watch out, and also for our kids' generation to know that we don't have all the answers, and let's do it together. Yeah,
that's really good.
Yeah.
I think about the phrase that I have been thinking about a lot lately as I think about ministering to the next generation is sincerity over strategy. I think that a lot of what's going on with the next generation is cynicism has become their primary mode of understanding the world, because it's a defensive measure, right? This generation has gone through the COVID-19 pandemic. They've gone through just incredible amounts of gun violence in the country. They have gone through, the recession, like just in every marker of what marks this generation. I mean, it's incredible the things that they've gone through. And how else are they going to live in this world except to be cynical about things? It makes sense to me. But if we don't break through that, then I think we're going to obviously lose them. And so more than thinking about the programs and the strategies we need to keep them, I really think that as leaders, we need to be humble, and we need to be sincere about the fact that we don't have all the answers to the questions. We actually are in need of empathy too. So how do we work together, right? How do we come to the table to work together? Because if I truly believe that you love Jesus, then the Holy Spirit's working in you just as much as working in me. And I'm going to be missing a huge part of what it means to be a part of the church if I don't have your understanding of what it means to be a part of this body, you know? So thank you so much for your insights, and thank you so much for joining us at the table.